Hey everybody, so these are the two full-length interviews that I shot for my film, Michif French, A Language of Our Own. I made the film for the Gimme Some Truth Film Festival, specifically the Gimme 10 and 30 Film Incubator, where 10 filmmakers had 30 days to each make their own documentary. I think the product turned out pretty well. You can go check it out if you'd like and judge for yourself. It was pretty well received at the initial screening, but there was just so much of the interviews that I had to cut out for time because we had a 7-minute time limit, and I couldn't include in the final film, unfortunately, but I wanted to share the entire interviews with you here today. And so without any more of my rambling, let's just get into it.
So my name is Candice Behrendt. My dad is Pete, and his mom is Isabel Ducharme, and her mom was Josie Lily. And I'm Métis from southwestern Manitoba, from the area of the Turtle Mountain area of De Lorraine. And I'm also French-Canadian from St. Boniface.
So I was wondering if I could get you to start by explaining what Michif French is.
Yeah, so Michif French is a dialect of Michif, which is the language of the Métis people. There are many dialects of Michif, and Michif French is the dialect that is spoken primarily around the area of what is today called St. Laurent, but also throughout southern Manitoba and somewhat in southwestern Saskatchewan as well, southeastern Saskatchewan.
Awesome. Could you explain the difference between Michif French and the other Michif dialects?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, I can. I'm definitely not an expert, to be clear. I'm just a learner. So I want to be clear about that. I'm not recognized academically as an expert, and I'm not recognized in our community as an expert, but I am a learner. My understanding of the difference is, in a nutshell, it's the syntax and the grammar. So in the southern dialect of Michif, much of the grammar is based on Inuit or Cree, or Plains Cree, whereas in Michif French, much of the grammar is based on French. However, there are grammatical differences which are so interesting and necessary and make our Michif special and unique and useful for us that distinguish it from French. So to be clear, it's not just a dialect of French or French spoken badly, as was often believed in the past, even by me. It's its own dialect of Michif, but it has a heavier influence by the French language than other dialects of Michif do.
So my first question for you today is, what personal importance and significance does the language mean to you?
Yeah, so boy, that's a big question. It's fundamentally important to my identity. It is a language that expresses things that only we can express as Métis people. It's a language that can express things that only we can express as Métis people who share values and share experiences. Michif French allows us to express to each other our feelings, our thoughts, in a way that only we can really understand. And so it's, I would say, like essential. It's essential as a communication tool, as our language.
When did you learn the language?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so I grew up bilingual. I learned to speak English and French at the same time. But I learned French from my French-Canadian family. And there is a difference between French-Canadian French and Michif French. Growing up, so my dad is Métis and my mom is French-Canadian. And my dad used to say, as many Métis folks did say at that time, during that generation, during my dad's time, we're French. And I knew my dad wasn't French, and I knew my dad's family wasn't French because my mom's family was French. So I knew the difference. I knew there was a difference in the language. I knew there was a difference in the culture, the values, but I never knew exactly what that difference was. I don't recall either of my parents ever using the word Métis actually to describe my dad's family. It wasn't something that was done in our family. Although we did many Métis things, we never explicitly stated it. So growing up, I had many cousins with which I would speak what I would call today Michif French. And we would do what I know today to be code switching. So when the teacher would come around, we would speak French Canadian French, or at that time we would call it good French. And then we would switch when it was just us cousins, or if I was with like aunties and uncles who would be speaking Michif French, we would switch to Michif French, or at that time what we would call like country French, or sometimes we would even call it bad French, but I would never call it that today. I think that's a pejorative term, and it's kind of an in-group term as well. But I do want to note that I mainly spoke this language in the communities of my mom's family, but I was speaking with Métis people in Michif French. So there was a really clear social marker that kind of allowed us to know when we could speak Michif French, or when we could speak our French, and when we could speak, when we had to speak French Canadian or good French. My dad's family actually never spoke the language with me. So where I got exposure to it, or where I learned it, is my mom's family, my French Canadian family, grew up in communities where Michif French was spoken, like St. Boniface or St. Pierre-Joli or Otterburn, Manitoba. And in those places, many of my friends that I hung out with, many of the people that I slept over at their house were Métis people. And I identified with that as having similar values to what my dad's family did. But my dad's family never spoke the language with me. So I had this strange journey of that because I was French Canadian and because I was around people who were often speaking Franco-Manitoban French, I was also invited into those circles as a person who understood and could also speak Michif French. So it was like a strange journey, but we were very clear on there was a difference between these two ways of speaking. I didn't know growing up that it was a whole different language, but I knew that there was times where we had to speak like school French and times where we got to speak our language. Mm-hmm.
So are you still learning new words and phrases even today?
Always, all the time. And I consider that as a responsibility as a Métis person. You know, we all come into this world with gifts. That's what I was taught. And responsibilities related to those gifts, you know. So for me, I'm a language teacher. I teach colonial French, that's a very colonial act, and it's complicated to do that as an Indigenous person. However, my gift of understanding language and of having access to English and French gives me that responsibility. And being a Métis person comes with responsibilities. You know, when we say I'm Métis, when we say, you know, je suis Michif, we have a responsibility that comes with that, especially as younger folks, to reach out to those generations that have the experiences and the knowledge and connect with them. And so my way of doing that is through language, and I pursue that actively all the time. Mm-hmm.
So for people who hear this or watch the documentary and want to start their path to learning the language, what resources are there, if any, out there to help them get started?
The best resource is your home community and your own family, always. We, in the colonial school system, we always look to researchers, books, materials that are valued in Western society. But, and to be clear, that does exist. There are books and researchers of European descent who research French Michif. But before familiarizing oneself with that, the best thing to do is to return to your community, whether that's your family, whether that's your cousins, whether that's an adult that you know who has a connection to the community that you don't, and physically make yourself available to those people. And it starts with, I don't actually know the word for this in Michif French, but in Southern Michif, it's called Makia Chakwewen. And it starts with the giving of a gift. It might be your presents. Maybe make some tea for your grandma. Maybe, text your cousins and see if somebody wants to get together for go out for pizza or something, and reconnect with your family. And doing that work is what's going to lead to the language. It's not immediate access in the way that colonial languages are, where you can sign up for a course and you can learn Italian, or you can sign up for a course and you can learn French. That's not really our way. You can sign up for courses and learn Michif French, but if nobody knows who you are, it's going to be awkward. It's really important to go and present yourself as you are, humbly, and say, my grandma is, in my case, my great-grandma, the matriarch of my family, is Josie Lily. And that's when people will start saying to you, oh, yes, I know her, she went to school with my friend, or that's my cousin, or what have you. And when you start building those connections, and when you start giving of your gifts, that's when you can ask to learn the language as well. And just be there, just be with people who speak the language and listen to it. It's hard work. It's much harder than taking a course. That's for sure. But that's our way. Mm-hmm.
So as an educator, does teaching young Métis people about the language interest you?
Yes, very much so. It's my biggest wish and my biggest goal as an educator is just to reach other Métis young people. And it seems like it would be easy. And I think initially when I became a teacher, I thought it would be. And that was a youthful mistake that I made because I didn't approach it from Métis perspective. The first thing I did when I became a teacher is I reached out to the Department of Education in Manitoba and I tried to create a course based on Michif. Like you could take French in school or Spanish. And I found that to be a challenge, not only from the colonial perspective of, the provincial government mandates what can be considered a high school course and what can't, but more importantly, from a cultural perspective. I could not find a way to do this that was respectful to our culture. And my worry was that, like French, it would become an economic opportunity, or it would be used as a course where they would put kids who couldn't get credits in other courses, or it would be used as a course that might sometimes be offered and might sometimes get canceled if there wasn't enough, inscription, enrollment. So those are very colonial approaches. And the school system is colonial, so that shouldn't have surprised me. But I became quickly aware there was many contradictions that just would not be appropriate culturally in bringing Michif as a course. I think it's also a question that I have to continuously bring forth with the language keepers, like the folks who are really expert in the language. And in speaking with them over the years, I I get the sense that there isn't a clear, correct answer yet. However, some of the work that's being done in our communities, immersive work in protecting the language, and Michif French is very, very endangered, is more community-oriented and less like school-oriented. So if one day, Michif winds up in schools as a course, I think that would be super cool. But first, I think the first step is bringing it back into our home communities through our own connections, our own family and community connections. And then school would come after that, because our family and community connections are more important than like academic structures.
So when you're talking about the community connections, how would you suggest going about that for someone who might not have a connection to a particular community because they've been displaced from that? Like we see with a lot of Métis today, their families kept it hidden for years, and so it might not feel that they can go to a community because it might feel like they've been severed from that community and they don't really have any. So what might you suggest doing in that situation for those people who don't have the same connections but still want to learn and want to regain?
Yes, that's such an important question. And I want to recognize that so many young people, what would be young people that are maybe between 15 and 25, let's say, are so eager to reconnect and rebuild a better world for Métis people, and don't have an easy or an obvious entry point. And that can be extremely intimidating. And I think sometimes even hostile. It can be really, kind of discouraging at times. So, again, the first and best entry point is spending more time with one's own living Métis relatives. However, not everybody is able to do that. There's people in care. There's people who are descendants of people who were scooped. There's people who have discovered that they are Métis, through genealogical work through St. Boniface Historical Society or through the Manitoba Métis Federation, but don't have any living relatives who have any connection to the culture anymore. And in those instances, I would say with caution, there are some communities, I have to think really carefully in how I say this. There are ways to connect online. For example, you could follow on social media, you could follow like your favorite Métis author or your favorite Métis musician, or follow the Manitoba Métis Federation or l'Union Nationale Métis de Saint-Joseph, which is another Métis organization, and see what's happening there. Where I would caution you is not to get sucked into being like online Métis, because real face-to-face Métis community is very different from, environments like TikTok, or there's a lot of Métis people that are active on Twitter, although I realize that's probably an older generation. But there's a really different environment in person as opposed to online. And connecting with people in person is a challenge, and it's not something we're used to anymore. It's something that we used to do in the past, and we're not very well practiced at anymore. But it's like anything. You start off and you might be awkward and no good at it, and you might find that it's uncomfortable approaching people and saying, oh, my grandma knew you, or can I come and make you some tea, or can I shovel your walkway, or hey, cousin, can we go out for pizza, or whatever. It can be awkward and uncomfortable, but over time, it gets easier and easier. And Métis people are extremely welcoming and loving. And when you find yourself in a community, when you start building that community in person, then you really start to learn the culture. And I think that's what young people are so hungry for. And, even I'm not sure if I'm allowed to reference you as the filmmaker, but even yourself, coming to me as another Métis person is building community. And so now I know you, now we're relatives. And that's how it starts, just that simple. And the next time I chat with somebody, I'm going to say, an older person in my community, a language keeper, I'm going to say, there's this young man, his name is Shoup, and he's making films about Michif. And they're going to go, oh, who's that? And I'm going to say, well, that's the grandson of, I think you said Arlene Flamand.
Yeah.
And they'll probably say, oh, her. And that's how it kind of starts, is just through these small acts like you're doing right now. It's a slow process. So it's different than anything that we do in colonial world. So it can feel uncomfortable, and you can be not sure if you're doing it right, and all of those things are okay. But that's how you build community, and that's how you reconnect with your culture.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or say or share? Anything at all? The floor is yours.
Just for young folks today, people, again, who are your age or, in their early 20s or their late teens that are wanting to reconnect and are feeling passionate about it and don't know where to start, you're doing it. You're doing a great job. And it's because of young people that the language will survive. And I know for sure, having met some older folks and having spoken with them about the language, Verna de Montigny, who speaks Southern Michif, she said to me, I thought it wasn't going to survive. Like, I thought it was going to end in our generation. And now I think it's going to survive. So as long as we keep doing this active work like this, I'm very hopeful for Métis people for the future to have a good quality of life. And I think that's all our ancestors wanted.
Thank you. That was very beautiful.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you again for doing this and for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. Now we're going to hear from my grandmother about her knowledge and experience with the language.
Hello, my name is Arlene Chapman. I was born Arlene Flamand. My mom and dad were Laurent Flamand and Emily Flamand.
Cool. Okay. Okay, perfect.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
End of the documentary. That's just where it ends.
Yeah,
It's just that, and then we're done. Okay, so you spoke this growing up, right? Like you spoke it like at home?
Well, it was okay. I'd have to give you some
Yeah,
background
no.
on that.
Give me the entire thing, entire story.
Okay. All right. So my father, Laurent Flamand, was a French speaking. He was a Métis, French speaking. He spoke French at home all the time. It was Michif French. My mom was English born, but she learned to speak French after she married my dad. Again, because she learned from him and his parents, because they lived in the same house together. When my parents got married, they lived with his parents, Isabel and Alexander Flamand. They lived together, and my mom obviously could not speak French at all. She learned to speak French after 8 months of living in a household of only French people. When they had their children, there were 13 children in the family. They used to speak French at home, but when we went to school, it wasn't allowed to speak French. So we went to school, we spoke English, came home, mom and dad would speak French to us, and we would respond in English, which did not please my dad. So we But doing that, unfortunately, most of us did not speak French every day. We understood it, like I understand French. In a pinch, I could speak it. It was a different time where it really wasn't allowed. The French books in school were not allowed. We weren't allowed to have French books in school by the school division, but we were taught by nuns, and they had French books, and they would make us learn French. But when inspector would come, because he would do a surprise visit, he would come to the school, and we would have to all hide the French books. So it was kind of an issue for families actually that did speak French at home, that they weren't allowed, their children weren't allowed to speak French. My elder sisters and brothers all spoke French fluently. When they went to school, it wasn't so much a rule for them, but going from the brother above me and going all the way down to the rest of the family, it was always only spoken French. So my younger siblings do not speak French. They don't understand it so much. No. Next question.
Okay, perfect. So when you went to school and the nuns would teach you the French, would you notice that difference from the French? Because I assume they were like the Quebec nun French, right? And
That's
then
right, yeah.
did you notice that difference between that French that you spoke at home and then that French that the nuns taught you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So the French that we learned at school was more of a Montreal French. It was the proper French. But at home, because it was Michif, a mixture of Cree and French, there was a lot of words that sounded like the words the French we learned at school, but they would not have been approved of to be speaking this French like in front of the nuns, because they came from different backgrounds themselves, and they pretty well all spoke French. So they would have spoken the proper French, or what they would call the proper French, as compared to the Métis French. The French, for some reason, has stuck in my head, because even all these years, actually, I was married to an Englishman. I was never around French people, but it was funny because sometimes I would find that I would be, like, say, taking a bus, many years ago, I would be taking a bus, and, people around are talking, right? And then I would realize all of a sudden that I'm listening to a conversation that's actually in French, but I'm understanding what they're saying because I'm sitting there smiling at what they're saying, so it's always in my head. And even when I'm out in public, I understand the French. And I mean, in a pinch, if I had to help someone out, I could put it all together, and it would come out French. It's funny also, I've been around certain people that they speak the Métis French as well. They have all these slangs and words that I can't say here. Quite often when I hear other people speaking the Métis French, it all comes back to me, all the words that, whenever we had a lot of people over at our house and they'd be speaking French and they'd have all these words that I can't say here, that they said a lot of those words actually, but it was very interesting because now when I hear these things, it just makes me smile because I think, wow, it's just like a flashback to those days, it's it's a strange feeling to be out in public and still hear the Métis French, because you don't hear it so much anymore. I wish I would have learned or kept speaking it, because it would have been nice to pass on that part of my life. However, growing up, we didn't know that we were Métis. We just didn't know because nobody talked about it, because it was not something that you were proud of. So it would have been something, actually, yeah, to be carried on. I regret not keeping up with it, or even when I would come home from school and my dad would say something in French, and me, being a smart aleck kid, would say answer in English, because that's what I was told at school, like, you just speak English. So, but it would have been nice to just continue keeping the language going, keeping it going forward. It would have been interesting. Today, I have, like I said, when I hear the slangs that I hear, the different things that people say, it's just like such a memory that comes back about it all, So, yeah. However, it is a concern that it is slowly dying out. And I mean, there's many reasons for that. But it's nice to know that there are young people that are interested in keeping it going and alive. But a lot more people have to take an active part in doing it. Now we're at a time where we don't have to be where we shouldn't be ashamed of what we are. I mean, we are. Many people may say or think that, oh, they're different or whatever, right? And there's always that connection because a long time ago we were called half-breeds. So there's that negative connotation, which is why I guess that a lot of people never want to admit that they were Métis, because that meant you had Indian blood, so that was something to be ashamed of. But I'm hearing more and more of people that are working hard to keep it going. I have a friend that she actually makes sashes, and she was teaching at the Festival de Voyageurs. She was in a room there, and she was teaching people how to make sashes, and she was teaching young people, and she's got many young grandchildren, and she is continuing to keep her Métis nationality alive as well. So it's hopeful. It is a hopeful situation, I feel, anyway, that now, like I said, we're not so ashamed of it anymore.
I'd like to again thank my gran for letting me interview her and for sharing her experiences and knowledge with us. You can read more about her life in her book, Keeper of the Albums, which is available for purchase on Amazon. I'm very proud of her for writing this book. She worked on it for so long, and actually, fun fact, I designed the cover. I highly recommend reading it. It's a truly inspiring read, and here's a little trailer for the book.
What do you want for your own life? I wanted freedom. In order to get that, I had to overcome countless obstacles to survive. I was able to become a true survivor by finding my spiritual path, which appeared to me in the form of a dream. A dream of a soft white cloud. I was born to a big and poverty-stricken Métis family, and has had to fight hard to find my true self in an extremely cruel world. I have found that pictures speak 1,000 words. I have more than 30 albums of my mother's and my own. My name is Arlene Chapman. I have been called the Keeper of the Albums.
Keeper of the Albums. Available for purchase on Amazon.ca.
By the way, I highly recommend this book. It is the Michif French Dictionary. You can pick it up at any McNally Robinson if you live in Manitoba, or you can order it online at their website. I highly recommend it. It is a dictionary, so it's with translations. It's just fantastically done. I look at it almost every single day. The film recently screened at the Scoden Indigenous Film Festival in Vancouver in April, and plans are being made to expand this project further, but that's really all I can say about that for right now. Anyways, Marcy, thank you for listening and sticking around to the very end. I hope that you learned something today, and I hope that you'll stick around for my future projects. I always have something in the works, if not 10 things at the same time. But anyways, I'm rambling again now, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye.